I'm going to mention, I've got my little checklist. Good morning, everyone. I feel a little bit like I'm talking to a whole lot of empty seats, which I am. Good morning to the public. Welcome. It's nice to see you all here this morning, and I do apologise that we weren't able to continue with our deliberations on the 27th of November. It was a very busy day, so we're here today to reconvene a meeting which began on Tuesday the 27th of November at around 2:30 p.m.
Would you feel more comfortable if we came and joined you around the table?
Personally, I would like that, but I don't think it's entirely appropriate. So I apologise to the gallery that this is a deliberation process between myself and the members and the staff, and I would appreciate it if you could try not to come in with comments, but thank you. Welcome to the gallery, and I do hope that we can move through this business in a fairly timely manner, but we want to ensure that we give due consideration to all of the submissions, and so I will be asking for Mark Tregurtha to go through his report in quite a lot of detail today. I just wanted to mention that this meeting is in public, so it's being live streamed onto Council's YouTube channel. A reminder to and I would like to welcome my hearing panel members, Councillor Skinner and Councillor Ackland, and I am Councillor Fulton. I'm chairing the meeting today. So this meeting is being live streamed, and it's a reconvened meeting. In the last meeting we went into public excluded for approximately an hour to discuss some legally privileged information, and we have since come out of that public excluded, and I think we're ready to begin the deliberation process. I would just like to remind members, if you have any interest, to please declare them. I understand that there has been some emails to staff and to myself concerning my involvement with the Brook Sanctuary, so I would just like to clarify right now, I'm not a member of the Brook Sanctuary. I did attend the Brook Sanctuary AGM last year in the capacity of a city councillor. It is very normal for city councillors to attend numerous AGMs around the city, including the SUTA, the Centre of Musical Arts and other facilities. So it's important as councillors we attend various AGMs which are held annually. I'd also like to mention that in the past I've been a strong supporter for trying to retain that the campground remains open, and so I feel that I have an open mind and have tried to support the interests of all parties up at the Brook Reserve. I think now we have moved the minutes. Did we move the minutes last time, Robin? Yes. So we've moved on to item 5. Item 6. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to begin now with asking Mark if he could please speak. If you could, we have all read your report, but it would be helpful because it's been quite a significant period of time since we had the hearing. If you could just run through your report and summarise. And I understand there has been some emails, some queries as well, so it would be helpful if you could provide any corrections as well.
Certainly. Good morning. As part of the deliberations process, you have the report in front of you with recommendations which the panel will consider once it has completed its deliberations. I have one correction to the report. That's on page 20 of your agenda, paragraph 7.2. In italics there is a comment that the Maitai pipeline does not run through the reserve. Subsequent discussions with the engineering team has actually sort of confirmed that the pipeline does run through the reserve. This is an important point in relation particularly to the submission from Mr. Richard Sullivan. That's page 95 of the original agenda, where Mr. Sullivan sets out his views on the public and private benefits that he believes relates to not stopping the road, particularly in relation to infrastructure. The panel, of course, can discuss the substance and the pros and cons of that when it gets to that part of the discussions. But I just felt that it was important to actually sort of note that at the start. My understanding is that the panel will be running through the report section by section, and of course referring through to the objections and submissions which have been made through to the proposals. I think from there we can perhaps start going through the report.
Thank you. So I think if we run through the report, and just before we begin that, I just wanted to clarify the reason why we're here today. I thought it would be useful just to touch quickly on the previous hearing process, and just to give a bit of background and context in terms of why we're here today, just to remind ourselves of that. So, because it has been a long process, it's gone over quite a few years. So back in June 2015, we publicly notified a draft Brook Recreation Reserve Management Plan in which there were two visions. During that hearing process, a submission from DOC raised a concern about the classification of the reserve as recreation reserve. And in that submission, DOC suggested that a more appropriate classification for all of the land should be local purpose. At some point in time, the term recreation reserve was coined. And so through the next series of hearings, we considered reclassifying what had been freehold land, what had been road land, and what had been recreation reserve, all as local purpose recreation reserve. It has since come to our attention that the words in brackets, recreation, is not appropriate, and so today we are here purely to deliberate over whether we should be replacing that word recreation in brackets with the words outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education. So that is a really brief background as to how we've ended up in this place today, just to try and give some context. Now, if either Councillor Skinner or Councillor Atkin have any questions throughout the process, just signal to me, and we'll pause and answer any questions along the way. So in terms of the deliberations report, I'm going to suggest that we begin on page at section 4.7 with the summary of submissions and objections. And Mark, if you wanted to maybe speak to that from 4.7 onwards.
Right, so the process for this particular deliberations started sort of back in September when we advertised for submissions, and then subsequently amended that to submissions and objections. There were, in all respects, there weren't a huge number of submissions and objections received. There were 16 for the proposed change to declare the stop road as local purpose, as you say, outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education, and 23 submissions on the second part for the proposed change to the specified purpose for the entire reserve. There were 11 people that requested to speak to their submissions, and of course they were held on the 1st of November. And there were a number of matters that were raised which were actually outside the consultation process, and they've been sort of noted in section 7 of the report. Sort of moving through to 5.1 of the report, the discussion. There were 10 that supported and 5 that objected to the proposal. And you'll see from paragraphs 5.1.1 through to 5.1.4 sort of the reasons why people supported the proposal. And there were just 4 submitters who supported the proposal but didn't actually provide specific reasons. Paragraph 5.2 onwards, that has the information on the objections to the proposal, and the panel might wish to perhaps discuss those in a bit more detail or ask questions on the points that the submitters have raised.
Madam Chair, can we be clear that we are objectors, not submitters? Thank you. There is a distinction in law.
Okay. Could I just remind the public gallery that you cannot interrupt, and if you do interrupt again, we'll have to call for an adjournment and we might have to move to another room. So it's up to you. You have the choice to stay and hear the deliberation process, or we will adjourn the meeting and we'll move to another room if you interrupt again. So you are welcome to be here and you are welcome to listen, but you must not interrupt. Thank you. So I'm just going to check, Councillor...
Well, I'd like to go through that in more detail.
Okay, so Councillor Ackland, have you got any questions? 5.2.1.
And then on Brook, I've got some reservations about information having come in after the hearing process. It all seems a bit loose, but it's fine because I understand there's been a correction made as a result of that, so that's good. But can you just go through the implications of it and what it means?
Right, so in respect to Mr. Richard Sullivan's submission, he raises in his submission and also in his presentations that in his view that there were a number of public and private benefits that relate through to not stopping the road. Now there is a pipeline that runs underneath the road, basically to support the water services through to the reserve and also further up to the Brook Sanctuary area. Mr. Sullivan's views on what those benefits are, I think are best articulated, through in his submission. I have had discussions with the water engineering area, and they are not concerned with the road being stopped. They're comfortable with the fact that they will have access through to their services as required. The advantages and disadvantages of stopping the road from a council point of view, it's perhaps slightly easier to access those pipes if it is a legal road as compared to a reserve. However, any access through to those pipes is likely to have either a temporary or a permanent effect on the reserve. So anything that we wanted to do there, we would probably need to go through 2 processes. One process in relation to the fact that if it remained a legal road for that, and then because the land surrounding it is a reserve, there's likely to be an impact on the reserve. So we would also need to go through a Reserves Act process as well. Anyway, one of the objectives of bringing it all together as a reserve is to enable us to just go through one process. And of course the panel will be aware that there is the expectation that we will have a comprehensive development plan prepared in due course, which will also assist with the management. You'll see on the map that the area of road which is to be stopped basically runs right through the reserve. it's difficult to envisage that anything that could be done to the piping under that road would not have an effect on the reserve. There's that view. Mr. Richard Sullivan has a different view on that, and as I said, that's articulated in his submission.
So in summary then, you're saying that if someone wanted to carry out works on the pipeline underneath the road, you'd have to be carrying out works on the rest of the reserve as well, so you would be interfering with the entire reserve?
Yeah, it's difficult to envisage that you could actually do changes to that pipeline without having an impact on the reserve. It might need to be closed temporarily. It might be that the diggers need to use the side of the reserve for full and so forth, either on probably on a temporary basis. And that brings us through to a Reserves Act process.
Mm-hmm. And have you got a question, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the clarification. You say it'd be a process, so if the case is a pipe burst there, you're saying it's not straightforward for council to dig up the pipe without going through a consensual... Through the chair, if it was emergency work, the staff have the authority to go through and fix it. You know, if a pipe bursts, then obviously we immediately go in and rectify that. It's if someone was wanting to develop land, which I think is one of the thoughts that Mr. Sullivan has, that the view is that they could possibly sort of use that corridor, but once again, as far as I can see, they would still need to have access through to the reserve, which would take us to a Reserves Act process. But I'll just reiterate, in any emergency, we go in and we fix that, whether it's on reserve or any other type of council land. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Just to clarify that, if it's developing land, but the water coming under that existing road is just water, as in your previous statement, is water that's just supplying the sanctuary and the current campsite. So how would that affect, so I'm not sure, in Mr. Sullivan's letters, it's claiming that the pipes going under there are also for the roading supply, raw water, but also for water supplying Stoke. So it's more than just the pipes supporting the reserve. Is that right?
Through the chair, there's no public access that we would allow through to the main Maitai pipelines. That's under high pressure, and so that's off limits.
That's not in the reserve?
That does go through part of the reserve.
Okay.
Mr. Sullivan's point is that we should keep the road to enable sort of access through to the infrastructure, but that infrastructure is a little bit different. We would never allow sort of the public access to that. I don't know what the proposals are for the development of the land, which I think is sort of referenced by Mr. Sullivan and another submitter. The engineering department have said that the pipe that goes up the road is 150 mil pipe, so it could be that there is capacity to link into that, but that's a whole different process outside of what the panel are talking about today. Access to that infrastructure, if it was requested, and once again we don't have anything in front of us, that would go through an easement process under whatever legal status the land had.
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to have to leave, I can't listen to this.
Can we please not
Could you please not interrupt?
in the meeting?
I'm just going to adjourn the
My
meeting.
family is staying. If you want developable land and it's not in there tomorrow.
Hang on, just let's speak.
gallery to desist from interrupting us again. It's really hard for the officers and the hearing panel to maintain a clear line of thought and to understand this process if there are interruptions. We want to respect your right to be in the gallery and to listen to us today, but if you interrupt again, we'll have to ask you to leave, or we'll have to adjourn the meeting again, and it's going to take a really long time if this keeps happening. So I'd like to request that you please be silent and respect the process. I understand it's a frustrating process for some people, but please could you respect the process and just sit and listen, and then we can carry on with our deliberation process. So, Mark, you were trying to explain to us the rationale behind the pipeworks, so the ability for people to access water or fix water, and the ability to do that if all of the land is classified as local purpose.
So through the chair, the panel will be aware, of course, that there's been some correspondence from submitters on this subsequent to making their submissions. What I was outlining before was the officer's view on the pros and cons of having the legal road as part of the reserve. I think from the submitter's point of view and from the work that the panel needs to undertake, you have the submission in front of you. You've also had the benefit of hearing from the submitters or objectors as part of the hearings process, and so therefore you need to sort of base your decision on your views of the points which have been raised. But just to reiterate from an officer's point of view, the management of the area and access to the infrastructure is far simpler with just one legal status of the land rather than 2 or 3, which we've had in the past.
And just to clarify, if a party wanted to access that pipeline, they would have to access it through the reserve anyway. So that would trigger this Reserves Act anyway.
Yeah, the submitters might have a different view, but just looking at the map, I find it difficult to see how it could any access to either the existing infrastructure or putting in new individual infrastructure could be done without having an impact on the reserve. As you'll see from the map, that area of road which is to be stopped is right within the reserve.
So it runs through the middle of the reserve. Councillor Skinner or Councillor Ackland, do you have any more questions?
Yes, just briefly. So we've got, as in your report corrected, that we've got both raw water and treated water goes through part of that roading, and I realise also for Simpson's Farm have that water supply going through there. And between the two landowners, or reserve and landowners, I just want to be completely clear that we're not getting ourselves into a pickle as far as being able to do works on that if there's development outside the reserve area, that it doesn't get us into a pickle as far as being access to increase capacity or so forth.
Through the chair, it's quite common for infrastructure to run through reserves. There is a process to follow which normally includes easements which can be followed, and so by making it a reserve it doesn't sort of cut off access entirely. It's just a different process that needs to be followed. We don't have any particular proposal in front of us for development, so it's not possible, and it's also outside my expertise to sort of comment on how a development would actually be undertaken. There's probably a number of options.
And last question through the chair, and in regards to the Simpsons and the Sullivan submission, and trying to understand how that works, is there any negative impact to them by putting that road in regards to the pipe services? Is it going to impact?
Through the chair, I think it's clear that the objectives believe that there is a disadvantage to them because of this proposal. You will be aware of the correspondence going back and forwards, trying to clarify exactly what those concerns are. You've got that information in front of you.
Okay. So I'm not quite, I've got the information, I'm not quite sure how that negatively impacts Simpsons or negatively impacts us, but you feel it's no different to the road as it is?
Are you trying to seek clarification?
Clarification.
Of what the perceived negative impacts might be?
Or what is, I don't understand what the negative impact.
Perception that there's a negative impact, whether it isn't negative. Can you clarify what the perceived negative impact might be?
I don't think it's appropriate for me to try and put words into the submitter's mouth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but it's just, from a legal perspective and a development perspective, you don't see there's an issue with us changing the status of that road as far as affecting the Simpsons. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I am putting you on the spot.
No, it's a fair enough question. Just what's the answer to the objection that you've read?
Sorry, could you...
We've got this pipeline, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, but we've got this pipeline which will supply any development, and there was a concern there from the Simpsons property in regards to our public reserve property and how the pipes go between the two blocks of land or titles, and there seems to be, I'm trying to work out why this has become an issue. We can still access, or council can still access, the piping from the reserve side regardless of the road classification, and I assume access to the Simpson farm for the piping underwater agreement is already there. I'm not sure seeing how this game changes through the decision we make today, but please let me know if it does change the whole game if we make a change to that status.
Through
what you've already
sorry, through the chair, from council's point of view, it doesn't have a significant impact. I've discussed it through with the engineering team. From the submitter's point of view, they have a different view.
Okay. I'll take it. Thank you.
So can I just be clear that on this map, so we've got the pipeline running approximately through the road stop, through that purple there, through that purple, yeah, and so if somebody wanted to connect to that pipeline, they would have to go over reserve land in order to do so.
That's what it appears to me. Or they might want to put their own infrastructure under that road, but once again to have that infrastructure carried through to the other side of the river, then it would need to go through the reserve.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, Councillor Smith
and
Councillor Ackland. So the issue is that if you wanted to connect to that pipe work, you would still have to go under reserve land. So you would be needing to consider the fact that it is reserve land as part of that process.
Okay, I'm happy if we move on.
Okay, so if we move on to 5.2.2, there was insufficient detail included in the proposal. If you just want to briefly touch on that, I think it's fairly clear that there was a lot of detail in the past, but we could just touch briefly on why it was felt that detail wasn't needed this time.
Right, so the two proposals before the panel are reasonably straightforward, and we sort of talked through those at the start of the meeting today. Because it's relatively straightforward in that respect, we didn't reiterate the history. To reiterate the history would have actually made it a lot more complicated for the public. But that information was, of course, available through what was contained in the approved in principle reserve management plan and other information on the website.
Access through the reserve by vehicle is required for those members of the public who are unable to walk to the dam, submitter 1934, and there's concern that incorporation of the road within the reserve might restrict public from using the road to access the Brook Sanctuary, submitters 19335 and 19344.
So My understanding of this is that there is concern that a road stopping actually stops people from accessing, but in actual fact, of course, it's a legal terminology. The road will remain there. There's no sort of change proposed to actually sort of stop people from actually using the road.
So we're all really clear that there is still going to be a road and there's still going to be accessibility through the reserve for people to utilise the space. So that was never the intention, to remove the road.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Well, I mean, I've got a question. I think it's even self-evident, but it's in line with the management plan, right? So, I mean, the point of the delegation to this committee to consider the change in legal status of the land is to allow the best methodology of achieving the objectives that are in the management plan. Am I right?
Through the Chair, yes, that is correct. And of course, the vision, which is included in the plan as well. The next step, or one of the next steps, is of course the comprehensive development plan, and that would look at any changes to infrastructure. That outline of the comprehensive development plan runs to basically 2 pages, so it would sort of look at any changes there at that stage.
So if we move on to 5.2.4, so there was a concern from a submitter that land in front of the camp was sold to the council in the 1950s for use as a camp for all the people of Nelson, and that the submitter is concerned that the road stopping contravened these understandings. If you just want to touch, it's very similar to the last one, but if we just touch on that briefly.
Yeah. Once again, what's in front of the panel is, the setting off the local purpose and the detail behind that. There's no intention, to as part of this process, to do any changes to what actually occurs on the land. Any changes would go through either a reserve management plan process or would be part of a comprehensive development plan, which would be worked through with the community.
I have a question around that. Could it be argued that in fact changing the word in brackets from recreation to say outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education makes it very clear that there is an intention that camping will continue in that area?
That is correct.
Councillor Ackland? No, so 5.2.5, there is concern from the submitter that the process will allow for more commercial development of the recreation reserve and reduce public access to the area.
So there's no intention as part of this process, to bring the land all under the one classification, to do any changes in that area. Any changes would be a result of a future process if they were proposed.
So can you just expand a little bit on that, because at the moment we're relying on our reserve management plan to set out our vision and what our future intentions are with that land, but that is 3 years old, and at that point in time I think there was a consideration that the gondola might go into this, the gondola base might go into this area. That has changed slightly. There is now the hoped site is now in the Maitai Valley, so that in many ways decreases the amount of commercial development that was going to occur. After this process is completed, there'll be an opportunity to re-look at the management plan as well, and re-evaluate the vision and what we are intending for that land at this point in time. Is that correct?
I haven't undertaken analysis at this stage on how the decisions that arrive out of this panel and final council decisions would impact on the reserve management plan. Once we get through this stage, I'll undertake that analysis and if necessary bring a report back through to council.
Okay. But in the meantime, the vision outlines, I'm just going to read the vision, that the Brook Recreation Reserve serves as a centre for environmental education and conservation and as a destination for camping and outdoor recreation, including appropriate, scaled and complementary commercial recreation and tourism development. So based on that vision, we would anticipate that the words we've decided that we've sought feedback on, the words we've sought feedback on are outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education. They're a good fit with that vision. We didn't include commercial activity in the brackets. We have relied on the vision to make allowances for that in an appropriate, scaled and complementary manner.
Yeah, so any commercial activity would need to fit within the that local purpose statement, and that's the whole reason for having it reasonably broad, is to enable flexibility to council and the community to consider those opportunities.
Okay. Do you have any questions around that commercial use of the land, Councillor Skinner? Have you any concerns around that?
No, I mean, we covered this a little while back prior to these deliberations in regards to how it affects, and if my understanding is still correct, if it was commercial or tourism development, it would have to be keeping it to scale, and so the idea of a little while back, there was a raising of a gondola potentially using that area, and I believe that wouldn't have been necessary to scale, and so that wouldn't have necessarily got the go-ahead on that land, so it would have to be something which is supporting what's happening there already, and not to a scale that it impacts the recreational use or reserve or camping of area. Is that correct in my thinking?
Yes.
Thank you.
My thinking concurs with what you're saying, so I agree that I believe that's the intention. Okay, so we'll move on to proposal to change the classification of local purpose, reserved to local purpose, outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education. If we just start from 5.3, there were 22 submissions, 10 supported and 12 objected. If we just touch briefly on those in favour, and then we'll look at the objections in more detail. So 5.3.1, the Brook Sanctuary submitted supporting the classification and believing that they didn't mention have any concerns with the words within the brackets. Can I just clarify that, Mark?
Right, yeah. In fact, there were no submissions or objections to the actual words which were proposed. The objections tended to relate through to different aspects of the proposal.
Okay. So if we just look at submitter 5.3.2, the proposed changes in line with Nelson Nature and the halo effect. So there was support because of our 2060 goals and our Nelson Nature program. Do you want to comment briefly on that, Mark?
This submitter sort of looked at the broader area and what's occurring in the Brook Sanctuary. The halo effect is sort of about building up bird life beyond the Brook Sanctuary, sort of like a halo around it. And this submitter saw that bringing the reserve all under, or this land all under one classification, supported that objective.
Okay. 5.3.3, holding the land for the same purpose will better allow council to manage future development of the area. It that will allow it to generate revenue to update the current outdated facilities and promote cooperation between the Brook Sanctuary, NMIT and other education providers. Submit is 1927319336. If you want to touch briefly on that as well.
So these two submissions actually reflect that there are this is quite a desirable piece of land, even though it's not perhaps a particularly large piece of land within, Nelson City itself. It demonstrates support that this particular piece of land has opportunities for a number of uses, and they've just outlined, in particular, the fact that some of the facilities up there is outdated, and that by moving forward, we can start to look at making improvements or the preparation of the development plan and consider, how that would be implemented in due course.
Okay. So I guess what I'm seeking here is to be sure that the words which we've put in the brackets, outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education, are in fact the right words and they're the right fit for this piece of land, and the submissions and support seem to agree that we haven't missed anything out and we haven't got anything in there which shouldn't be in there, in my mind. Would that the submissions would seem to indicate that?
Yeah. Yes.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gifford, on that, just looking at those 5.3, because I've just gone through 5.3.1, 5.3.2, etc. In regards to supporting it for the halo effects, and I've got here in regards to 5.3.1 in regards to Nelson Marlborough Institute of Technology. So what we've already got and what we will have with this reclassification, I don't see that having any change in the positive effect for the halo. So the case that we change it or don't change it would still positively support the halo. So I'm been struggling with it's been great people come here, submit and support, but I couldn't see the benefit of supporting this, because whatever we did, status quo was still going to have a access and effect. Have I got that right?
Through the Chair, it depends on how the comprehensive development plan is developed and some of the specific projects that might arise out of that.
Okay, and the other one in regards to 5.3.1, this one goes back historically. We've got the Nelson Marlborough Institute of Technology. So what we're doing, they may intend to request to build some buildings on this reserve. Is that saying that at the moment they can't build on the reserve, but with this new classification, then it's open slather for building polytech buildings on there?
Through the Chair, they would still need to go through a process. What we're working towards here is, of course, with a reserve management plan that has a lifespan of about 10 years. At the moment, there's no particular, proposals, but by having the purpose set out as it is, if an approach is made, then that means that council and the community can actually consider that proposal.
Classification.
Yeah, that's right. Without being specific that we are open to, education, conservation, outdoor leisure as part of the purpose, then we're actually more restricted under what can be undertaken on the reserve. For example, if it was simply a recreation reserve, there are restrictions on what can actually occur, particularly if the activity relates to something off the reserve. Okay. And so that is one of the things that has been talked about in the past, that if any activities were proposed on this reserve land but related through to the sanctuary or anywhere else, then that's incompatible with the Reserves Act. So by having it broad and having it as a local purpose, that enables council
to consider any proposals that come forward over the 10-year lifespan of the reserve management plan.
So at the moment we've got local purpose recreation plus the commercial within scope. That wouldn't allow an MIT building in, but if we're changing this to a slight change, you could say, to the classification because of a legal issue, that's going to open the ability.
Through the chair, the local purpose part where it's classified as local purpose recreation, the local purpose part does enable, you know, other activities to be undertaken. The problem is with the second part, recreation, that in fact what the Reserves Act contemplates is if you wish to have something as recreation, then you call it a recreation reserve. You don't call it a local purpose recreation reserve.
Yeah, so that is why we're here today, because unfortunately the term local purpose with recreation in brackets is ultra vires. So we are here to come up with something in brackets which is legal and supports the vision and the current management plan. And unfortunately we're not here today to discuss whether we go back to a recreation reserve status.
But we are here to make the right decision on the classification,
yes,
not to necessarily accommodate an MIT building on the reserve. I'm saying this is a decision which is opening a new use of it, and we've got to decide whether that's a good new use of that, or was it really part of our...
So I think it's important to be clear that when the previous hearing panel considered local purpose recreation, they had understood that allowed for education up it, because that was always part of the management plan. So it wasn't ever intended that you could not carry out education purposes within that area. And that dates back to 2015. So initially, the intention had been a management plan was developed which included outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education, and the land was all going to be designated recreation reserve land. And through that process, DOC submitted and said, if you want to carry out all of those activities, you haven't got the designation right, it needs to be local purpose. I'm not entirely sure who put the word recreation in local purpose recreation, whether that was Rob Greenaway or the DOC staff member who came up with that proposition, but that was the second round of the hearing process where we considered ensuring that the designation of the land sat within what we were intending to use the land for. And subsequent to that decision being made, it's been deemed that that term is ultra vires, so that is why we're here today, because we are trying to find the words in brackets which fit what we intend to use the land for.
Understand, I'm just cautious that what we're trying to do isn't having other implications, and that was the reason that this prior to the first round of reclassification, there was a concern by some that it was trying to just justify an original desire, originally the building MIT buildings, which are just off-site at the moment, but were, I believe, ready to go on-site, and that was concern that that wasn't the intent of what the reserve was for, and then for the policy to build on that, maybe some staff advice, that can't happen unless council changes that classification, which we've changed that classification, and now this 5.3.1 is supporting it, this reclassification to enable, it would seem, an MIT building to be put onto the camp reserve. So I'm just cross purposes here. We're not making a decision to favour any one particular usage, but it seems like maybe that will be the outcome. That may be not in step with what our management plan is.
So Mark, have we had any objections to the word education being included in the brackets?
No, we haven't.
I think that if there had been objections to the word education being included in brackets, we could consider that. But at this point in time, management plan discusses using the land for education purposes and conservation purposes. It's very much intended that the education is for conservation. It's not, you're not just building a I don't know, a hospitality school up there. It's around education in a conservation setting. So it's not intended that we set up education for other than for conservation.
Just being mindful that the implications of what we're doing here is not being an undercurrent's not probably a strong word, that the interest on change this classification may be more than an interest in preserving it as a reserve with its various local purposes. But I'll leave it at that, and unless Ms Traverse has got anything to add to that.
I think if we just go back to the, in response to that, go back to the vision which says the Brook Recreation Reserve serves as a centre for environmental education and conservation and as a destination for camping and outdoor recreation. So we have already given that direction in our vision. The comprehensive development plan, which follows after this process, after the management plan has been updated, that would consider appropriate education use of the land. And I think that's always been the intention. We just carry on now to 5.3.5, where we just might remind ourselves that that the current specific local purpose may be ultra vires. So that's submitters 19339 and 19255. Mark, if you just wanted to comment briefly on that.
I think you've summed it up very, very well.
Okay, any questions around that? Okay, so then we'll go to 5.3.6. The change will support a comprehensive planning approach to the future of the Brook Reserve. Mark, I think we've covered this off already, but maybe just touch on why it's important to have all of the land classified in the same light, because I did ask some questions last time about whether some land could retain recreation reserve status.
Right. So under the various statutes that council works under, when we undertake developments or changes to particular pieces of land, we have to consider the legal status of that land. The previous split, which included freehold land, legal road, and also reserve, for such a small piece of land, you know, relatively speaking, would make sort of any changes sort of quite difficult, because we would need to consider the three different legal statuses. The Reserves Act as well complicates things, because we can undertake different activities depending on the type of reserve that it is. So therefore, if we split the type of reserves that the land actually is, then we would need to consider for anything that was occurring on there, the different aspects. And then of course, if we got into a situation where something straddled over the two different legal statuses, then we would need to be running sort of two processes to actually progress things. The comprehensive development plan is obviously where eventually we want to be heading, you know, working with the community on this piece of land, which is so highly valued by different members of the community for different reasons. You know, working with the community to establish that plan and then to implement it. At the moment, without that, of course, we're basically in a frozen situation. You know, we can't actually sort of meet anyone's needs as far as sort of changes to what's actually occurring there.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you for that, Mark, and explaining very well. That might leads me on to some questions I have in regards to, we've got option 1, option 2. What page was that on? I just had that in front of me a moment ago. That's right on page 21. So we've got recommended options, and the second option, or first option is reclassify both the road and the various pockets of land to that reclassification. And option 2 is to reclassify the pockets of land, but the road stopped land to be recreation reserve. And that might lead on to what you were just talking about, straddling or usage. What's the positive and negative of that? If we reclassify all the land either side of a road, but the road we reclassified but as recreation reserve rather than the leisure, conservation, education, etc. My first reflection on that would be like, well, that's fine, it'll be fine. We just have the roads stopped, it's reserved, but the rest is as it is, or what we're reclassifying. I might be naively thinking that's not an issue, that would still be fine. It's the same as option 1.
Through the chair, what I'll refer back to here is the work with the Environment Court. The Environment Court said that the road could be stopped so long as it was amalgamated into the rest of the reserve area. So this is sort of an attempt to sort of find any other sort of option that the panel could consider. It's not a very strong option.
So in the sense that you're saying that we couldn't do that if we changed the road, even though we're stopping the road as suggested, because it's not in keeping with the same reclassification, the rest of it we'd be going against what we're allowed to do. Is that?
Through the chair, yes, would need to go through another consultation process.
Okay, and pushing the envelope further, if we reclassified all the pockets of land, but we didn't stop the road, we left it as a legal road, which seems to work fine at the moment. That's how it's operated at the moment. It's a legal road. The camp's been running, was running prior for many, many years, and you can still access the sanctuary. So that was my wonderment at the submitters in support of what we were doing, because I saw that it didn't change any of the advantages of accessing the sanctuary, accessing the camp, using the camp, or Joe Blogg's going for a picnic by leaving a road as a public road as it currently is, and doing what we do with the rest of the land.
Through the chair, so yeah, for the majority of the public, they wouldn't notice any difference on the classification of the road. Councillor Skinner is quite correct there. What it would mean though, and sort of going back to what I was saying earlier on, is that it complicates any developments or changes or even maintenance which we want to undertake on that land. With having 2 legal statuses, we need to run 2 different processes, which seems a little bit inefficient given the size of the land. And furthermore, if there were things undertaken which affected the road and leaving it as a legal road, once again, I think that whatever occurred would have an effect on the reserve. So we're back into running 2 processes. I mean, even if the road was dug up, it's likely that some of the fill would need to go onto the side of the road. The road might need to be temporarily closed off and so forth. So we would need to sort of run 2 processes to either consult with the public or inform the public of what was happening.
From that through Chair, I understand the bit of road that goes into the dam site, goes into the sanctuary. We would need to stop that, so it's a sanctuary. But we've had that legal road there for many a year, and many a year people have been able to camp there, many a year people have been able to have picnics there, and many a year we've had to do servicing on it, either side of a road, on the road, and I haven't seen an issue of difficulty with that. So I'm not sure if it really solves or gives us advantage.
I just wonder
so I'm not trying to be, I am being devil's advocate.
If Mark could remind us then, presumably within the original management plan, Rob Greenaway proposed to stop the road. Can you just expand on why that proposal happened in the first place? That might help Councillor Skinner's understanding.
Okay, so perhaps to use an example, when we get, through the chair, when we get through to
the comprehensive development plan, if council, and just using this as an example, if council wanted to change the road slightly to improve parking and the like, that means that you know, to shift the road slightly and so forth, we would need to be sort of working under two processes to actually achieve that. Whereas if it was one piece of land, it makes it a lot simpler. Is that example helpful?
Yes,
that's a good example, and some might state that by road stopping it, so it's no longer a public road, that one could down the line stop access to the camp for you and I to have a picnic, or to make access to the sanctuary, or go to a walk, go for a... Is that a...
Through the chair, as outlined in the report, there's no intention to put a barrier up or anything. You know, the intention is still to allow access. If for any reason, you know, it was determined, right, we did actually want to put a physical barrier there, I think given the amount of public interest, we would need to go through, you know, a consultation process. But as I said, that is not envisaged either in the reserve management plan or the outline of the comprehensive development plan.
Thank you, that's all from me.
Councillor Ackland had some questions now.
Well, I want to come back to that, the barrier issue, but just first, just in terms of the option 2, it looks a bit like to me like it's an option 2 given for the sake of giving another option, but because we've identified disadvantages which are really clear in my mind, the advantages that have been identified are as it might meet some of the objections or points of objection and submission that we've received. But can you explain to me what the advantages, what possible advantages there are? Because I just need to balance that really, because I've heard the disadvantages, but I haven't clearly heard really what those advantages could be. Just that it might, in terms of advantages for the plan that we've got for that area, because that's ultimately what we're looking at, is advancing those interests. What advantages could there be in having those different statuses of land?
Through the chair, there's not really. I mean, the three options for the legal road are either to keep it as a legal road, incorporate it within the rest of the reserve and give it the same classification, or give it any other classification. And so for that, you know, I just sort of picked out, you know, recreation reserve as a, you know, any other
no, I understand, option. but you can't articulate in terms of the management plan that council has proposed in principle, and the point of this is to advance, is to achieve those objectives and visions and all those things. There's no real advantage for that plan to have a different status for those two areas of land.
That is correct. There's no advantage.
Okay. Just on the physical barrier, I think naturally, often there is a real sense of distrust of public organisations when it comes to decisions that can be perceived as having a consequence in the long term. Just in the immediate term, you've said that there's no intention of council to put up a physical barrier, and there's no intention in the management plan over the next 10 years to do anything like that. In fact, it's the opposite. It's to be public land and public access. It seems to me that when there's a proposal to do that, that would be the time for protesting and to come to council and have a crack at governors for making that decision subsequently, because, am I right, there's just no intention by anyone in the governance level at council to put up a physical barrier?
No, there's no intention. I think one of the problems is, sorry, through the chair, is that, you know, the term road stopping sounds like a barrier. It's just a legal term to actually transfer it from legal road through to non-legal road.
Yep. Okay, that's really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So it's a term which perhaps creates distrust in the community because of the word stopping. People think that that means the road's going to be stopped, when in fact that's never been the intention. Councillor Skinner.
Sorry. To follow on that, with the change of this road from being a public road to being a reserve road, is it but I mean, it's not our intent, but is it potentially possible in the future from another council then to close that road, either physically or legally, to stop you and I having a picnic up there? I know that's not our intention, quite the opposite, but I think there's fear that another council, under a different desire or an idea of what they want to use that land, could then, because it's not a public road, am I right in my thinking, or
I think Councillor Atkins asked almost exactly the same question, and I think it's important we go through this quite thoroughly.
My question's different, is that there is no intent to stop people having a picnic up there, but is that possible then with a change of legal status? Is it then possible?
Yeah.
That question wasn't asked or answered.
Through the chair, so that option would be available to any future council, whether it be legal road or part of the reserve. You know, there's processes to close off roads under the Local Government Act, you know, if it was a legal road, either permanently or temporary. You know, case in point, top of Trafalgar Street, you know, we go through a process there. I mean, it's quite counterintuitive, because if council was to put in a barrier there, then that would also be affecting access through to the Brook Sanctuary. So I understand people's concerns with the term road stopping.
There's comfort that it's a legal road, that it would be difficult to stop someone going up and have a picnic.
Look, a future, I don't want to worry people, but a future council...
What if it's a road? Okay. Road.
No, but it's an access, we're talking about the access, the road. There's a comfort knowing that being it's a legal road, that you can legally go up there without affecting what's going on either side. But as soon as it becomes not a legal road, there's either an unjustified fear or a justified fear that...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is an unjustified fear, yeah.
Or a justified fear as well, I put there, so is there...
I think it's important to try and this is the bit where I guess we do have to take a bit of a step back in time and try and understand why it was proposed to stop the road and make it a non-legal road, even though there was still a road going through the area, and the intention was based on the vision. So I just found this part in the management plan, which says the option allows for the following main developments on the reserve, subject to an agreement on a comprehensive development plan: facilities and services which support the activities of the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary, facilities and services associated with the Brook Conservation Education Centre, Eureka Park, a commercial camping ground, commercial tourism and recreation developments of a scale and type which complement the natural, social and existing commercial values of the reserve, developments for casual local recreation opportunities and events such as an improved access to the Brook stream and play and picnic facilities, and a relocatable home park. So it was very clear in that there was a desire to retain as a space for permanent campers, and that the campground was important, and that we wanted to improve connections for the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary and education opportunities.
My point, and you don't need an answer on that, but just to clear up, as Chair of Sport and Rec, I'm well aware that there's people who have been up there to have a picnic and have been turned around by management erroneously, told them you can't be up here, have a picnic, or even walk up here, and I'm aware of that firsthand. So there's some concern that, even though our intent is not to do that, and direction from us, the council, and me as Chair of Sport Rec, has never been to stop people having picnics up there, but there's a fear that then makes it difficult. So our intent is good, and what here isn't good, but we could still get into a pickle, just like the original decision on the classification, without any bad intent, creating an issue of legal virus. So and I don't need an answer here, because like anything's possible or impossible, but you get some poor management from people making decisions or looking after the campsite area with the wrong understanding or knowledge, or pushing the boundaries and tell people to move. So that's where the concern comes from. It's more of a statement. I'm not after an answer. I'm just making that clear out there.
I totally
concern.
concur with you. The concerns raised by the community have historical
and current
issues, and I think there is a lot we could be doing better. Unfortunately, as a panel, we're restricted to.
I don't want to give empowerment. I don't want to give empowerment. I want to give empowerment to. I'm not talking about council managers or management, but those who are contracted to council to be then suddenly within their right to stop people because we've made a change.
I concur. So we might need to have a think about how we
put it all on the table.
How we ensure that there's messaging around accessibility. So I think what Councillor Skinner is saying is that he wants this local purpose reserve to remain accessible to all, and I think that's the feeling of the entire panel, that accessibility to all remains paramount. Councillor Ackland, you had some questions. You don't want Tim what?
You could quite well.
Yeah,
I don't mean to be facetious, but say we decided not to do these things. We recommended to council that none of that happen, and under the just to paint the picture of how impotent it is to worry about future. We can only deal with what we've got today, and just to illustrate that, say we thought we can restrict the ability of a future council to do something, restrict public access, because we're worried that public access could be in the future restricted if we change the status of this land. Well, a future council could make the decision that we're being asked to make today. So I don't see that solves anything, because a future council could say, well, actually we want to now manage that reserve in this way, and we're going to do this, and that's what we're going to do.
We need to reflect on.
No, I wasn't meaning that for a point of debate. It was just to illustrate that we're only dealing with what we know.
Correct.
And what we know is that we've got this management plan that council has passed in principle, that the best way of implementing that management plan on advice and after hearing submissions is in the way that's been recommended as option one. And so, there is this sort of deep-seated, often as the case, a deep-seated distrust and fear of local body decision making, which is always in my mind ironic, because it is a transparent organisation as opposed to an organisation that's private. For instance, it doesn't have the same levels of transparency that you can't influence. There is influence of city councillors, and yet we're worried about something that isn't even in anyone's knowledge of being a possibility. We're worried that could be an outcome. I just think that that's misplaced. So I just, Madam Chair, if I can just say it, I just want to please, if we could move to deliberation, I think would be useful so that we can advance this.
I'm ready.
So you feel, I just wanted to double check that we'll just really quickly go through the last. You ready to deliberate? So if we can just quickly go through 5.3.8 through to 5.3.12, just to be sure that, because there's a couple of other objections, 5.3.14, there's a couple of other objections in this section in the terms of the change of purpose, because the other section was around the road stopping. This section's is with regard to objections to the change in purpose. So we'll just run through those very quickly. 5.3.8, there's a concern that the camp could change and the community and general public could be excluded.
Okay.
The objection noted that there is a need to keep the camp open and for the needs of the communities that currently reside there. I think we've just been talking about that, how important it is that the area remain open and accessible, particularly to campers and picnickers. Mark, do you want to add anything more to that?
No, would you like me to just run through each paragraph sort of one by one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, 5.3.9, where the submitter is concerned about accessibility. Once again, there's no sort of proposed changes through to the walking track, around the Brook fence there. 5.3.10, commercialisation. any sort of commercial development would, need to go through, the appropriate processes, and we've already sort of discussed some of those this morning, and the reserve management plan, and the vision sort of provides for consideration of any proposals.
I have a question with regards to that and the submission we had from Gail Collingwood. I just about called her Councillor Collingwood. So she was concerned about Eureka Park retaining its identity, and previously I imagine with the consideration of the mountain bike sort of hub being potentially up there, or the gondola being up there, that was perhaps at risk. In your mind, with the move to it being up the Maitai, does that address some of the concerns she raised in her submission?
Yes, it does, and I think in the hearings, Ms. Collingwood expressed interest in that update of information and seemed to be pleased that that was now changing. The comprehensive development plan, once again, and I know I keep coming back to this, but it's somewhat frustrating that, we're going through processes which actually haven't enabled us to sort of consider that and, the benefits that would actually bring to the community, including for Eureka Park.
Okay, so could we therefore anticipate, so back in 2015, we were perhaps anticipating a mountain bike hub or gondola park being as part of this facility, and so in fact now we could be anticipating there's less commercialisation, even though that vision allows for commercialisation in keeping with the land. We would anticipate that there's less commercial development than perhaps we'd thought there might be.
I'm just struggling to understand the relevance of this, because the point is kind of the same as with respect I just made with Councillor Skinner's points, is that all we're being tasked to do, we're not being tasked to re-examine the management plan that the council has adopted in principle. And when Ms. Collingwood submitted, it had no relevance with respect to her at all to the decision that this group is being tasked with examining, because it involves a discrete area of management of that area of land under a management plan which we don't have any decision-making power over today. So getting detailed understandings of aspects of that management plan doesn't help me in the least in terms of my deliberation and decision this morning.
Thanks.
I'm just worried.
I guess I think that the reason why I'm asking those questions is, had the word commercial been inserted into those brackets, I would be concerned, and I think that it isn't. It's not recommended, but there's not been any submissions asking for that either, and I think that it's quite important because of the current community interest in this site. It's important that we are upfront about what our current expectations are for this piece of land, and I think that,
management plan,
which is 3 years old.
We'll move on.
So if we can
5.3.11, that the area sort of relates through to the land gifted to the council by Thomas Cawthron. Look, we've undertaken a number of investigations in that, and the Cawthron land is outside of this area.
Can you just briefly outline where it is?
I do have a map of it somewhere. It's a significant distance away. Yeah.
Okay.
5.3.12, there was a concern there about giving or leasing more land to the Brook Sanctuary. Look, once again, part of the comprehensive development plan would be to sort of look at, what different parts of the reserve would be used for, and there would be a process that would council would need to go through to consider this or any other proposal from the public.
5.3.13, which proposes that council can't actually change the specific local purpose. There seemed to be a misunderstanding. The land is actually classified at the moment as local purpose recreation. That gazetting was undertaken, and accordingly, with the advice that council has received, hence the panel is considering a improved local purpose. 5.3.14, and this is picking up perhaps on the points that Councillor Ackland was raising. People were concerned about the Brook Recreation Reserve Management Plan. That is outside of what the panel is looking at today.
Okay. Councillor Skinner has a question.
Just a question or comment, more of a comment that can be added to, is that understanding of Cawthron Park. My understanding of Cawthron Park is not where the reserve is, it's slightly further east. But my understanding of Mr. Cawthron, when he donated that land, and back in the time when this was a water reserve catchment area, it was clearly stated that there was a public access right through that area, right through the reserve, so that the Cawthron Park could be accessible. So though submissions and talking about that, I think they're including that aspect of it. The over Cawthron Park is over here and the reserve is over here. It was very clear, and historical writings that I've viewed from Mr. Cawthron, that when he kindly gifted those lands for the water catchment, water reserve, and which the council have been able to then use to provide water if you don't use it anymore, that the understanding was a gift was that there'd always be a public access. And this also goes back to the road, that we have a public road access to that point. So that needs to be kept mindful. And I don't necessarily see that what we're doing, whatever reclassification on that, will have a negative impact. But it needs to be kept in mind. That's why it was raised.
So is there any way that classifying the land as local purpose, outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education could remove the ability for the public to access the picnicking?
This is what we've got to be mindful, and I don't want to get outside the scope of what we're here today, but I'm just so there's no misunderstanding. Knowledge is lost very quickly over generations, and that's where I've seen that knowledge has been lost. We've got a Cawthron Park, we've got our reserves, we're looking after talking about this reserve, but there was a clear historical understanding that there was always to be a access, and that just needs to be, probably after this meeting, keep in mind. It's good to have that understanding.
So I have a question then, Mark, as part of our deliberation process, because I think we should probably begin deliberating now. Is that page 19, the Cawthron Park, that's on page, what page number is that?
19.
Of the
10. Yeah. But I'm saying that I've covered enough of this. I'm ready for us to...
Yeah, so my question, Mark, is as part of the deliberation process, so we're here today to solely to look at those words within the brackets and to decide whether that's the appropriate new classification. Are we able to also provide any direction or feedback in terms of other issues that have been raised during the submission process?
So the process from here is that the chair prepares a report that goes through to council. You could note within that report that there were matters that were raised outside of the terms of reference and summarise those.
I think that might be helpful in terms of addressing some of the concerns that have been raised through the submission and objection process.
I'm happy with it.
And can you just, if I could just get a page number for that, where the Cawthron land is, that would be helpful.
So I think that's a 2015 version, but it is in both.
Page 10, yeah, great, page 10, thank you. I think we'll just have a 5-minute adjournment quickly, just grab a cup of coffee and have a short break, and then we can begin to deliberate. Okay, thank you. Councillor Skinner, are you all good?
It's wife calling, but okay. Can I take that?
I'm going to pause for 1 more minute. Or adjourn for another couple of minutes. Reconvening the meeting now. Do we have all our hearing panel ready to go? I'm going to start off by, if I move the recommendation? If I move the recommendation that the Brook Reserve Hearings Panel receives the report, Brook Reserve, Deliberations on Classification and Road Stopping Processes and its attachments, confirms that the Chair should prepare a report recommending that Council declares the stopped road land as marked purple on attachment 1 to be vested in it as local purpose outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education reserve, approves the change in specified purpose of the local purpose recreation reserve as marked green on attachment 2 of the report to local purpose outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education, and delegates the authority to the Chief Executive to take the steps necessary to prepare and place notices in the Gazette in order to vest the stopped road land as reserve and change the specified local purpose of the local purpose reserve, and delegates the authority to the Chief Executive to take the steps necessary to complete the road stopping process under the 10th schedule of the Local Government Act 1974 and amalgamate the reserve. So I'm happy to move that. Do I have someone who will second it?
Just clarify that. In layman's terms, we've got like options 1 and 2, and I understand that as option 1. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Do I have a seconder or not?
Yes.
Oh, Councillor Ackland's happy to second. So do we have any more questions of officers before we begin to deliberate? So do you, no more questions? I think we're past questions too. Great. So I just want to check if there's any more subsequent questions. So if I open up deliberations, Councillor Ackland, would you like to begin with some comments?
Sure. I think probably everyone by now, through the questions I've asked, both submitters and staff know kind of my view on it. My view is that our decision making today, our scope of decision is pretty limited. It's pretty small in terms of the areas of information we can look into to come to the correct decision. And in a way, that is no doubt frustrating for people who have submitted on aspects that are outside the scope of our decision. I don't mean to discount that in any way, but it doesn't help me, and a lot of the information that's been given doesn't help me in the decision I've been tasked by Council to make and recommend back to Council. And the decision I come to is very squarely option 1 of the Council of the recommendation that's been moved and seconded. And really that shone through in my view with Mark's responses to the option 2. Really there's no advantage in having, for land stoppage, for having different status of land in the one area, and that clearly there's an advantage in having one status because it streamlines and makes legal applications or things that may come through use of that land or changes to that land. It's easy to have one, not two different types of land. And also it just provides overall certainty of that area and follows the intent of what has gone before. And then in terms of the use, the actual classification overall, there's been no submission against the words that were included in that classification, and quite simply those words are the appropriate words to advance what Council has already adopted in principle of the management plan. So it would be, it's easy for me to say, well, that's clearly the right process to take to advance what Council's already adopted in the management plan. And although I hear a lot of concerns, I hear a lot of worry, those are things that can be raised through the management plan, targeted at the management plan and the way that council uses that land and area in the future. Good, thanks.
Okay, great. Councillor Skinner.
Thanks for that, and I thank the staff for being here and giving us the feedback, even with the difficult questions we've put to them. I support the recommendation we have in front of us. The statement I'd like to make clear is that we have a council and a community being very privileged from a foresight of Thomas Cawthron and the purchases of the land and titles that have been transferred over the past to have this beautiful area as a reserve for both camping and once before being a water reserve. And I appreciate, and a lot of what I took for granted well before being on council, but since living in the area, and that's why we've got a lot of people who've taken a great interest in this, because both historically we've got its access to a very historic site with the iron waterworks, something that's the oldest in the country of its type, and it's a beautiful bit of land that reserve accesses onto. You've got original native beech forest there, which you don't get anywhere else in the area so close to CBD. We've got a beautiful camp there, which for many a generation has been appreciated, both campers, holiday makers, and even locals going there for a Christmas camp and going for a picnic. And people don't take that for granted and have appreciated that. And so there's a lot wanting to protect that access. And when the road originally was a legal road, it was for various reasons, for water supply works, etc. There's been a lot of change in the area, and most people accept change, and there's always pros and negatives to where you or others develop in the area. So I do appreciate those who've presented of us both in support and oppose of what's in front of us, and it is easy for us to say, hey, we're only going to scope this little pocket of land, but we as councillors and actually trustees of land, Kate, Luke and myself, we are actually trustees of that land, and we had the fortune there of Mr. Rodwell, who used to be a councillor and a past trustee, and it's very clearly stated that we, not just councillors there, we're actually trustees. When this land was gifted and reserved, we were trustees, we still are trustees, so there's a lot of weight on our shoulders to make the right decisions. And my intent, and I know it's intent around the table and staff and council as a whole, is to retain public access and prudent use of that land, whether it be a camp, etc. And it has frustrated me for many years now since being on council that we haven't been able to get this camp running to its full capacity, and there has been issues with people feeling, rightly or wrongly, not being able to utilise the land for picnics there, etc. So I'm very conscious, and I know you're all very conscious, that that intent is still our intent, and in the future our intent. But as things happen and we need to reclassify the land so it can be used the best, I do support this, and I do thank the staff for answering our questions. And this hasn't been, for such a small pocket of area, it's you can see the implications if wrong decisions are made, and we've seen that in the past. So yes, I do support what we've got on the table, but I also want to make it very clear and thankful for the public that will take a great interest in that. And once again, us as trustees got to make sure that we do have the best intent, but that we don't unintentionally create a situation that's difficult. So yes, this reclassification will, for my mind, help us move forward to the management plan, help us move forward to making use of this camp as it was and has been as a public asset, public picnic area, public camp which gets a return for the ratepayer as always intent, and an access to the heritage. I want to make sure that whatever we do in the future still retains that access to the heritage area, access to the beautiful flora and fauna in the area. And as you know, this creek that runs through this bit of land has, and I say this still is, but has in up to recent days been the clearest water in the country that goes through an urban area. And maybe I'm getting a wee bit emotive here.
No, do it.
But both in my amateur readings of history of the area, both Māori and iwi realised that, and that's why they called it what it is, Wamarama. There's been clarity and clear. They realised it was a great gathering for both flora and fauna in the area. And when I read in the books of early settlers that came to Nelson, in those writings, the books I've collected, they also realised that was the clearest water that's consistently over dry summers and heavy rain is very consistent. You'll know that when we have a dry summer, it always runs. When we have a heavy rainfall, it very quickly clears itself because we've got that catchment. and our forefathers realised that. So anything we do with this land at the moment, as trustees, we are trustees of it, we need to be wise about it. And I believe this is why this process has taken probably a bit of a slow process, and it's had its friction points. But I do support this, but it's all up to us now as trustees of this land to continue that, looking after that land for all, the best of all. And thank you, Chair, for chairing a difficult process. I've been on a few hearing panels, and you know this one's been pretty close to my heart. And I know it's been close to both your hearts, but this is where we are today, and we'll move forward.
Thank you so much for that, Councillor Skinner and Councillor Ackland. I think we're all in agreement that this is the right pathway forward, and it is important to remember that today we are here just to consider the reclassification of the land from local purpose with recreation in brackets to local purpose, outdoor leisure, camping, conservation and education. And as we have had a lot of submissions in support, and we have had a lot of objections as well, there have not been any objections to those words in brackets. And I believe that hopefully this time we might have got it right. Fingers crossed we have got this right, and that those indeed do reflect the essence of what this piece of land means to our community. I think that when we look at the vision, which is that the Brook Recreation Reserve serves as a centre for environmental education and conservation, and as a destination for camping and outdoor recreation, including appropriate scaled and complementary commercial recreation and tourism development. I think that everyone who has submitted is striving to reach that goal. The process we've gone through over the last few years has not carried our community with us, and we have not done well in that regards. And I think the animosity we've experienced today is a result of not the words in brackets, but is a result of losing the trust of the community through perhaps closing the campground down very suddenly, through possibly not considering the impacts on people who love this area in our council processes, which are incredibly bureaucratic and incredibly confusing and complicated for many people, including ourselves, or we would not be here today. So, you know, I would like to acknowledge the past hearing panels and the past pieces of work which have been done to try and achieve. And all throughout this process, I believe everyone has been trying to achieve a good outcome and reach a place which can take the community with it, but on numerous occasions and for numerous reasons we've missed that. And I'd like to consider within that chairperson's report how we include some notes in terms of regaining the trust of the community. I think what's come through really clearly in the objections is that they want the land to be open and accessible to all, and I think that they want a commitment for the reserve to have local recreation opportunities. So I think that those are things which we need to consider at a later date through the council process, and hopefully we can suggest to council that they pick up on that and they take a re-look at the Brook Recreation Reserve Management Plan, and then they incorporate that into the Comprehensive Development Plan as well. So there's 2 more steps in this process. Once this process is finished, we've still got 2 more steps to go through, and hopefully throughout that we can consult with the community and get some good guidance from them as to what their vision is for this very important piece of land. I think particularly around the Eureka Park, the camping ground and the relocatable home park aspects of it, we should be looking at how we can do our best with that area so it's attractive and vibrant again, and then consider how the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary can rebuild a strong relationship with the other users of this local purpose reserve. So if there's no more concerns or comments in terms of, I think most of them were raised during our questions, and I'll pick up on some of that and work that into my chairperson's report. But if you're both happy, I'll move the recommendation. Councillor Skip.
Just one quick, and I just also want, we as council, we've got neighbours to us, Fair Land, so I want to make sure we continue our rapport, respect for those landowners surrounding the area, take on board some of the
that's a very good point.
That have been raised.
Yes, that's something I overlooked. So including in our note how we improve the relationship with our surrounding landowners, I think is important to have a conversation about that through the next step. Okay, so I'll move that the recommendation be accepted. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? I forgot to say aye myself. Aye. The recommendation is passed, and I'm going to now formally close the deliberations, close the meeting, and thank you everyone for attending. Oh, thank you very much, Mark, for providing such a thorough and detailed report, and you've obviously spent a lot of time trying to ensure that all of the objectives and submissions have been heard and carefully considered. So thank you for that time.
Thank you, Nikki, also.
Thank you, Nikki. Robert.